A rich kid mocked his black teacher in front of the whole class. But what she did next, nobody, not even him, saw coming. Who even reads this stuff anymore? The voice came from the back of the classroom, loud, sarcastic, way too comfortable for someone who had just started school that week. Ms. Nain Caldwell paused mid-sentence, chalk still in hand, and looked up from the board. It was Preston Cavanaugh, 16, smug, arms crossed over a $300 hoodie, slouched in his chair like he'd bought the building and was just visiting to check on his investment. A few students chuckled, not because it was funny, but because it was Preston. And Preston was new, rich, white, and clearly used to people laughing when he opened his mouth. Preston raised his voice and mimicked a thick Southern accent, her accent, and then in a drawl. And then the little slave boy said, "Yes, sir, I was unpicked that cotton real fast, sir." He doubled over laughing like he'd just killed at open mic night. A couple of kids laughed again, this time nervously. Miss Caldwell said nothing. She just stood still, like a statue, except her eyes. Her eyes were on fire, not with rage, but with something deeper, something that made the entire room fall silent in seconds. No yelling, no slamming books or sending him to the office. She simply turned and walked back to her desk, picked up a notebook, clicked a pen, and spoke. Preston. His name floated across the room like a feather, but landed with the weight of a brick. "You'll be staying after class today." He smirked. "What for?" She looked up, smiling just slightly. "To start your assignment." The class looked around, confused. There was no assignment. At least, not one she had told them about. But nobody asked questions, not when Miss Caldwell used that voice. It was the kind of voice that didn't beg for attention. It commanded it, not with volume, but with certainty. Preston shrugged. Whatever. But something in his voice cracked, just barely. Like he wasn't quite as in control of the room as he thought. The bell rang 10 minutes later. Everyone scrambled. Backpacks zipped. Sneakers squeaked on tile. Eyes were everywhere. Except Preston. He stayed seated, watching her, waiting for the lecture, waiting for her to bring the hammer down. Instead, she opened her top drawer and pulled out a plain folder. No markings, no label, just old manila, soft from time and use. She slid it across the desk to him. "You'll open that when you get home. Not before. And you'll come back tomorrow with your answer." He narrowed his eyes. "Answer to what?" She didn't blink. "To whether you want to keep pretending, or if you're ready to learn something real." He let out a short laugh. "Lady, I've been to 3 different schools in the last year. You think I haven't seen real? You've seen money," she said, her voice still soft. "Not truth." The folder sat there between them like a live wire. Preston didn't touch it, just leaned back, stared her down, waiting for her to fold. But she never did. And for the first time in a long time, Preston Cavanaugh didn't have a comeback. But before he could decide whether to throw the folder in the trash or actually open it, he learned just how serious Miss Caldwell was and how far she was willing to go to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Preston didn't open the folder that night. He tossed it on his marble desk in his oversized bedroom in Buckhead, Georgia, where the lights dimmed by remote and his PS5 sat under a 75-inch TV he barely played anymore. He scrolled through his phone, watched half a video, and muted it. Then he stared at the folder, still there, unbothered, silent, waiting. By midnight, he was pacing, not out of fear. At least that's what he told himself. He just couldn't stop thinking about her face. That calm, that confidence, the way she didn't even flinch when he mocked her. He'd seen teachers cry, seen them scream, get red-faced and overwhelmed. Miss Caldwell, she didn't break a sweat, and that annoyed him. The next day, he showed up early. Not to apologize, not even to talk. He just wanted to watch, see what kind of spell this woman had on the rest of the school. Because clearly, they liked her. She walked through the halls, and students greeted her like she was a celebrity. Not out of fear, out of respect. Seniors fist-bumped her. Freshmen smiled and waved. And every teacher who passed gave her a nod, a real one, not fake. He sat in the back of her class again, arms folded. This time, she didn't call on him, didn't acknowledge him, just kept teaching like he was part of the furniture. And the weird part? The lesson wasn't bad. They were reading The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. But she wasn't just talking about the book. She was talking about the people behind it, The context, the history, the humanity. And the students, they were into it. Preston noticed this kid, Jerome. He thought his name was, leaned forward like he was hanging on to every word. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just a class. This was her room, her space, her rules. And somehow, even without raising her voice, she ran it like a boss. He stayed after again, folders still untouched in his bag. Miss Caldwell didn't ask. Instead, she handed him an envelope. "This," she said, "is your next step. If you're serious. I haven't even looked at the first one. That's your choice." He rolled his eyes. "This a game to you?" She looked straight at him. "No, this is work. The kind of work you've never had to do. Because people like me had to do it for you." There was no malice in her voice. Just facts. That night, Preston finally opened the folder. Inside was a photo. Black and white. An old man in a worn suit, sitting on a bus bench. Underneath it, a single name, Hollis Dent. On the back, one line. "Find him. Listen. No phone. No recording. Just you, a notebook, and ears that are finally open." But Preston wasn't ready for what Mr. Hollis Dent would tell him, or how it would hit harder than any punishment he'd ever faced. Preston didn't ask for a ride that Saturday. He didn't want his dad's driver, the matte black Escalade, or any of the usual comfort. He took the city bus instead, just like the note said. He had to transfer twice. The last stop dropped him near the edge of South Dekar, Georgia. No fancy shops, no craft burger joints, just tired buildings, faded signs, and sidewalks that cracked like skin left out in the sun too long. He walked 3 blocks until he spotted the bench from the photo. There he was. Same suit, same posture, same stare. Mr. Hollis Dent, 84 years old. Skin like leather, but eyes sharp, too sharp for someone who was supposed to be retired. Preston approached, unsure. "Mr. Dent." The old man didn't move. "You the boy named Sent?" Preston blinked. Yeah, I guess." "Don't guess. Either you are or you ain't." Preston nodded. "I am." Mr. Dent finally looked up. "Sit." He sat. No small talk. No pleasantries. Just silence. And then, "You ever been called boy by a grown man who knows your name?" Preston shrugged. "Not really." "I have," Mr. Dent said. 53 times by the time I turned 16. 38 of those by men in uniform. Preston didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. "I marched with King once," Mr. Dent continued. "But only once. Got cracked across the ribs by a cop with a baton. Never marched again. Didn't mean I stopped fighting. I just got smarter. Started organizing from the inside." Preston leaned in, finally curious. "Ms. Caldwell said I should listen." Mr. Dent smirked. "Did she now? That woman's got more sense in her pinky finger than most folks do in their whole body. You messed with her, didn't you?" Preston looked down. Didn't think she'd actually do anything. He muttered. Mr. Dent gave a slow, raspy laugh. "She didn't have to. She sent me." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed, delicate. It was an old newspaper clipping. Local teen wins state debate. Demands curriculum include black authors. The photo was fuzzy, but there was no mistaking her. 17-year-old Nain, with thick glasses and a serious stare. "She's been fighting for this longer than you've been alive, boy." Preston ran his fingers over the paper. "She's different," he said. "No," Mr. Dent corrected him. "You're just used to teachers that let you get away with things." They sat for nearly 2 hours. Mr. Dent told him about his mother being fired for speaking up at a PTA meeting about walking 5 miles to the black school because the bus didn't stop for them. About the sound of metal chains in jail holding cells, where he and 50 others were thrown for sitting at a lunch counter. History, Mr. Dent said, ain't something you memorize for a test. It's something you carry on your back, in your blood, whether you like it or not. When Preston left, the folder felt heavier in his hands. The next Monday, he walked into class early. Ms. Caldwell was already writing notes on the board. Preston placed the folded clipping from Mr. Dent on her desk, gently, like it was something sacred. She turned around. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. Just a small nod. Not for approval, but for acknowledgement. He took his seat. When the bell rang, she started class like nothing had happened. No mention of the visit. No pat on the back. But on his desk was a new envelope. Smaller this time, with just a location written on the front. Birmingham, Alabama. Civil Rights Institute. Saturday, 10:30 a.m. But this wouldn't be a conversation on a bench. What Preston was about to walk into next would shake him in ways he couldn't prepare for, and break down the walls he didn't even know he'd built. Preston barely spoke the whole 3 hour. The drive to Birmingham. His dad had offered the private jet, even the Bentley. Preston said no. He took the Greyhound. He wanted quiet. He wanted distance. And maybe, deep down, he didn't want to be seen. He arrived just past 10 o'clock. The sun already harsh against the stone steps of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. A security guard pointed him toward a side entrance. Someone had clearly been expecting him. Inside, it was cool, quiet, heavy. Every hallway whispered stories. Every photo on the wall felt like it was watching him back. He met Ms. Caldwell near the entrance to the main exhibit. She was dressed simply, jeans, a plain blue shirt, and a crossbody bag. No clipboard. No notebook. Just her. "You're here," she said. Preston nodded. "I am. This isn't a tour. It's not a school trip. You don't get extra credit. No grades. I get it." She looked him over once, then started walking. Preston followed. They walked past the original jail door from the Birmingham City Jail, the one that held Martin Luther King Jr. when he wrote his letter from Birmingham jail. The air felt thick. They stopped in front of a glass case holding a burned church shoe. One single shoe. Ms. Caldwell didn't say a word. Preston read the plaque beneath it. It belonged to Addie Mae Collins, one of 4 girls killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing on September 15, 1963. He stared at it, not because it was shocking, but because it was small, child-sized. Just a shoe, torn at the sole, covered in soot. It didn't look like something that should hold grief, but it did. How old was she? Preston asked quietly. 14. He looked away. They moved on. More displays. More names. Emmett Till. Viola Liuzzo. Medgar Evers. Bayard Rustin. Each name came with a photo, a voice, a body, a story. "This is what you joked about," Miss Caldwell said. Not harsh. Not angry. Just honest. Preston felt it in his throat. "I didn't know," he muttered. "No, you didn't want to know." They entered the movement gallery. Walls filled with images of fire hoses slamming into crowds, police dogs lunging, protesters face down on the ground, blood on pavement. Then a video. A black woman, older, speaking into the camera. Preston watched. She spoke about trying to enroll her son in an all-white school in 1961, about walking past jeering crowds, about holding her child's hand while people spat at them. Preston turned to Ms. Caldwell. "That was you." She nodded. "Why didn't you tell the class?" "Because they don't need to know my trauma to understand the truth." "But you needed to." They stood in silence, and for the first time since he transferred, Preston wasn't performing. He wasn't sarcastic. He wasn't detached. He was listening. She handed him a small notebook, blank-lined. "What's this?" "Start writing. Anything. Everything. Reactions. Questions. Lies you've told yourself. Things you never questioned until now." He held the notebook like it might break. "I've never done this before," he said. "That's why you need to." They sat together in the courtyard after. No talking. She sipped tea from a thermos. He opened the notebook and just stared at the page. Finally, he wrote, "I used to think history was boring because it wasn't about me." Then he wrote, "But maybe it was. Maybe it always was. He didn't want to see how." He didn't show it to her. Not yet. On the bus ride home, Preston looked out the window. Not at his phone. Not at his reflection. But at the world. Different now. The graffiti on a passing bridge. A mural of John Lewis on a brick wall. A street sign named after someone he'd never noticed. He opened the notebook again. Wrote 3 more pages before the bus even left Alabama. That Monday, he walked into class 5 minutes early. He asked if he could read something aloud. The room quieted. Even Ms. Caldwell tilted her head. Preston stood, pulled out his notebook, and read. "I used to think I was better than the people who live the stories in our books because I had money, because I had options. But now I see they didn't need money. They were the lesson, and I was too proud to learn it." Nobody said a word. Not because they didn't care, but because for once he did. But Preston wasn't done yet. What he had to say next in front of the whole class, would turn that silence into something unforgettable. Friday morning. Miss Caldwell's classroom was full before the first bell rang. Word had spread. Even students who weren't in her class had shown up early, leaning against the back wall, whispering. Everyone had heard what Preston Cavanaugh was about to do. He stood in front of the class, a folded piece of paper in one hand, his notebook in the other. No slides, no fancy intro. Just him, standing in front of people who a week ago didn't expect anything from him except a snarky comment. He cleared his throat. I didn't write a paper, he said. I wrote something else. Miss Caldwell sat at her desk, hands folded, watching, not judging, just there. He looked around. I used to think I knew everything. I didn't. He opened his notebook and began. When I walked into this school, I thought I was doing you all a favor. I thought public school meant easy, meant soft. Teachers meant jokes that wouldn't get me kicked out again. But then I met Miss Caldwell, and she didn't yell. She didn't punish me. She invited me. She gave me a chance to hear voices I'd ignored. People I'd never think to talk to stories I wouldn't bother learning. Mr. Hollis Dent, he looked me in the face and told me about the day he stopped marching because his ribs were cracked open by a police baton. And he told me, this is history, not the kind in books, the kind we live, the kind we bleed. At the Civil Rights Institute, I saw a burned church shoe that belonged to a girl named Addie Mae. She was 14, and I realized something. The joke I made about slaves? That wasn't a joke. That was me proving how little I knew about the world. The truth is, I was scared. Scared to admit that I didn't know what I didn't know. But Ms. Caldwell made me look. And once you see, you can't unsee. He paused. The room was still. Even the usual loudmouths sat quiet. Preston looked up from the page. I thought power meant being louder than everyone else. But it's not. Real power is listening and letting it change you. He folded the page, tucked it in the back of his notebook, and sat down. No one clapped. Not because they didn't care, but because they weren't. Ready to break the moment, Miss Caldwell stood and walked slowly to the front. She looked at the class, not at him. What you just witnessed, she said, is growth. Not perfection, not redemption, just a step. And sometimes that's enough. Then she turned to Preston. Her voice was even. You showed us that it's never too late to learn. But now comes the hard part. He tilted his head. What's that? Living it. She turned back to the board and started writing the day's lesson, like nothing unusual had just happened. The rest of the class followed. But some of them, they looked at Preston differently now. Not as the rich kid with the attitude, but as someone who'd finally shut up long enough to listen. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because after the final bell rang and the hallway emptied, Preston had one more thing to say. This time, face to face. Just him and Ms. Caldwell. The final bell rang. Backpacks zipped. Desks scraped. Laughter spilled into the hallway like water breaking through a dam. Preston didn't move. He waited until the last student was gone. Miss Caldwell was erasing the board slowly. And steady, like always, he walked up to her desk, notebook in hand. She didn't look up. She just said, "You did what I asked. That matters." "I didn't come for credit," he said. This time, she looked at him. "I came to say thank you." She sat down, folding her hands together. "That was brave," she said. Preston shook his head. "No, it was late. It should have come sooner. You were raised to think you were already done learning," she said. He looked at her, eyes serious. "I'm not done. I know that now." She gave him a small smile. "Then you're ahead of most adults I know." There was a silence. Not awkward, not heavy, just real. Preston pulled a sheet of paper from his notebook and laid it on her desk. It was the photo of her from the newspaper clipping. The teenage version of her, glasses and all. Below it, he'd written, "Thank you for fighting for a classroom that could hold both truth and grace." Miss Caldwell picked up the paper. She took her time reading it. Then she folded it carefully. She looked him in the eye. "You've still got a lot of work to do." "I know," he said, "and not just for yourself. Everyone's going to forgive you as quickly as this room did. I don't expect them to." "Good." She stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the parking lot, where kids were piling into cars, heading into their weekends. Then, without turning around, she said, "Go earn it, Preston, with your life, not just your words." He didn't say anything back. He just nodded, turned, and walked out. This time, with both feet on the ground. Because the best apologies aren't spoken, they're lived. And sometimes, the person who teaches you the most isn't the one yelling in your face, but the one who refuses to lower their standards just to make you comfortable. If this story made you pause for even a second, ask yourself this. Who in your life has tried to teach you something you weren't ready to hear? Maybe it's time you listened. And if you're in a position to teach, do it with the strength of Ms. Caldwell. Patient, firm, and unforgettable.